All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Colma, and I'm the head of programs and communications here at International House. I'm grateful to see so many people here today for this important conversation, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the 17th Annual Tetsuo Najita Distinguished Lecture. Tonight's program is one of many held annually here at International House, featuring prominent speakers, roundtable discussion groups, and special interest conferences and seminars. Leading figures from the world stage come to International House to share their thoughts and exchange ideas with students and members of the Chicagoland community. Tonight's program is no exception. From the day International House opened its doors over 91 years ago, our mission has been to promote cross-cultural understanding, mutual respect, and friendship among international students, scholars, and the community. That mission is made manifest through programs like tonight's, and that mission guides the work of the 15 other international houses around the world. You can find out more about our programming on our website and by following us on social media. Before we get started with the discussion and I turn the podium over, a few thank yous are in order. Of course, first, thank you to our good friends at the Center for East Asian Studies, Chelsea, Abby, Connie, and others. It's always wonderful to work together, so much so that over the course of the next 6 days, we have 3 other programs that we're doing together with the Center for East Asian Studies. On Saturday, if you're interested, we have 100 years of Chinese all-female Yue opera. On Monday, we have lunch with Guzheng virtuoso Wu Fei. And on Tuesday, we are holding a China town hall on U.S.-China relations with Deputy Secretary of State Kurt Campbell, who will be videoed into for that event. So we hope that you'll all come back and join us for those programs. I want to thank our team here at International House who helped in putting this together. And of course, I want to thank our speakers, our featured speaker, Professor Ann Allison, and to Professor Thomas Lamar as well. And now I have the pleasure of turning the mic over to Professor Chelsea Foxwell to get us further down and moving the program forward. Chelsea, thank you all very much.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 17th Annual Najita Distinguished Lecture in Japanese Studies. As you've seen, this event is also part of the International House Global Voices program, and the Center for East Asian Studies is proud to continue our partnership with International House and thanks them for their support. So the Tetsuo Najita Distinguished Lecture Series was begun in 2007 by the CEAS Committee on Japanese Studies to honor the legacy of the late Dr. Tetsuo Najita. He passed away in 2021, and he was the Robert S. Ingersoll Distinguished Service Professor Emeritus of History and of East Asian Languages and Civilizations here at the university. We really established this series to honor and celebrate his contribution to our university during his long career. Educated at Grinnell College and Harvard University, Tetsuo Najita joined the faculty of the university in 1969. His many publications on Japan's early modern and modern intellectual history include Harake and the Politics of Compromise in 1967, which was awarded the John King Fairbank Prize, and Visions of Virtue, the Kaitokudo Merchant Academy of Osaka from 1987, which won the Yamagata Banto Prize. It works on Japanese on the topic of doing intellectual history. And in 2009, Ordinary Economies in Japan, A Historical Perspective, 1759 to 1950. This impressive body of scholarship, which combined theoretical rigor with rock-solid research, and which was ordered by the assertion that historians must always engage with the moral and political issues of our time, served as an inspiration to the many undergraduate and graduate students whom he trained. In addition to this distinguished record of service and of scholarship and teaching, during his 33-year tenure at the university, Tetsuo Najita dedicated much energy to building the Japan Studies program, while playing a leading role within the history department and the social science division. We in Japanese Studies are truly honored to carry on his legacy and at the university here. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Thomas Lamar, who will in turn introduce our speaker. Professor Lamar received his PhD in East Asian Languages and Civilizations here at the University of Chicago and taught at McGill University before joining our faculty. Currently, in addition to serving as Chair of Cinema and Media Studies, he is the Gordon J. Lang Distinguished Service Professor in the Department of Cinema and Media Studies, as well as East Asian Languages and Civilizations and the college. Please join me in welcoming Professor Tom Lamar.
So thank you, Chelsea, for the warm welcome, and welcome everyone here tonight. It's really a great privilege and honor to have Ann Allison speaking here tonight. Professor Allison is a professor in the Department of Cultural Anthropology at Duke, and therefore not only an old friend of mine, but also a former colleague. Her research really spans a broad range of issues, and you'll see it, I think, partly in her talk tonight, but she's actually worked on nightlife in Japan, popular culture, Pokemon, sexuality, gender, precarity, and death. And this work spans a really impressive range of books. She has 5 books to date. The first one, Night Work, Sexuality, Pleasure, and Corporate Masculinity in a Tokyo Hostess Club, was instantly a classic in the field when it was published, setting new standards for multi-site ethnography. And of course, I personally was using it in my classes all the time, so I feel I know Anne's work from the outset. This work was followed up by another, Prohibited and Prohibited Desires, Mothers, Comics, and Censorship in Japan, in which Professor Allison launched herself in a new arena, exploring popular culture. And this would culminate in a third book, Millennial Monsters, Japanese Toys, and the Global Imagination. And this work was also groundbreaking for the way in which she tried to deal with the scene of popular culture and ethnography as a scene of communicative functions. Finally, a major turn in her work results in a 4th book, Precarious Japan, and this was awarded a prize from the American Ethnological Society in 2013. And here she explores the nature of precarity in Japan, spanning the range from labor to general social issues. And that leads us finally to the work she's going to discuss tonight, the recently released volume called Being Dead Otherwise. I'm very eager to hear what you have to say on this topic. I always wondered what it would like to be dead otherwise, but I will know more about this. I should finally mention that Anne has an incredible impact on the field, not only through her work in ethnography and popular culture, but also through the many students that she's produced that now work among us at the University of Chicago and other locations. And in addition, she's just been very, very active in general publications, editing volumes, developing conferences, and has developed this broad range of anthropology from popular culture all the way to the issues she'll discuss tonight. So please give Professor Allison a warm welcome. And you're one step closer.
Good evening. It is an incredible honor for me to have been invited to be this year's speaker in Tetsuo Najida Distinguished Speaker Series. It's at University of Chicago where I received my PhD in the Department of Anthropology at a time when Japan was not considered a proper object of study. And in fact, one of the leading professors of the department at the time questioned why, if I had to study Japan, I hadn't done so by choosing a village instead of urban Japan, where my dissertation was on hostess clubs. But I was incredibly fortunate to have as allies and teachers those vibrant scholars then housed in the Department of Far Eastern Languages and Civilizations who were leading the country in the intellectualism and boldness of their research on Japan. Tetsuo Najita, Harry Harutyunian, Bertie Silberman, Bill Sibley. I learned tremendously from all of them and would have never been able to do the work I have done without their brilliance and support. So it is with deep gratitude to both the mark and work of particularly Tetsuo Najita and Harry Harutyunian that I delivered my talk today. In doing so, I would like to thank International House, the Center for East Asian Studies, for this invitation, to my good friend Tom Lamar for the invitation, for his friendship and wonderful scholarship, to Connie Yip for all of the logistical help and for indulging my endless emails, and to all of you for being here tonight. Thank you. So I'm going to read a talk without PowerPoint, and then I have some visuals to show you at the end. Being dead otherwise. We die alone and in a specific moment of time, biologically at least. But what happens to the dead after that, as material remains and as a presence maintained through memory, mourning, and ritual care, depends on others. Managing the dead calls on a social response, what has long been considered by philosophers to be constitutive of humanity itself. For Hegel, making houses for the dead signaled the onset of both memory and symbol making, capacities that extend humanness beyond biological survival and the temporal here and now. The ability to imagine an otherwise is harbored here, where houses for the living are mere shelters, structures for preserving life. A tomb is the work of the symbol-making architect. And to treat a dead body as if it were ordinary organic matter is to deny its very humanity, what Thomas Lacour in his Cultural History of Mortal Remains calls a universal cultural logic. But what happens when the dead can no longer be assured of such a place, of remembrance and respect among the living? And when the institutions governing the biopolitics of making life step back from doing so in the making of death? And when none of this is the exception due to warfare or plague, but rather has become more likely even every day for a community at large. This is the issue I contemplate through the lens of 21st century Japan, a country that, alongside a turn to post-growth economics, is experiencing demographic shifts. The population is aging and living ever longer, coupled with decline in the rates of both marriage and childbirth, meaning that more Japanese both live and die alone, and also that more Japanese die than come into life every year. What makes Japan a so-called mass death society, with an overall population that has been declining ever since 2006. In the face of downsizing sociality, what once was the normative pattern of living in a family-based household and entering the ancestral grave of one's patrilineal line upon death is coming undone. Today, Japan has entered what some Japanese scholars call its era of dead without family, a condition that for those without children, a partner, a spouse, or are otherwise bereft of a family grave, leaves an increasing number of Japanese without a place to go upon death. Signs of such homelessness of the dead are escalating, of urns left on trains, of those socially and physically alone whose corpses, once discovered, wind up as unclaimed remains by municipalities, a phenomenon on the rise in Japan called lonely or solitary death, and of family graves that going untended for years become essentially abandoned, as do the ancestors resting inside. As I aim to show, there is a precarity of death care in Japan today. But despite or precisely because of this, new forms of managing death and new relationships for necrosociality are emerging as well. Under the umbrella of shukatsu, ending market, an entire range of services, businesses, and initiatives cater to those seeking to substitute or supplement the family in mortuary arrangements. Not a biopolitics of making life per se, nor the necropolitics of killing those beyond productivity and social support, as brilliantly envisioned by Hayao Chie in her dystopic film Plan 75, of having post-productive elderly over the age of 75 self-euthanize. Shukatsu is an activity organized around the crafting of death undertaken by the living, often in anticipation of a future when it is ever more likely that one may wind up dead all alone. Brought into the present, where it is handled increasingly by the self instead of by others, death-making has become a booming business today that takes place in the shadows of a rise in lonely deaths and stories of abandonment. How does all of this realign grievability? With what responses and responsibilities by and for whom? And with what effects between, or perhaps beyond, the living and the dead, are the questions I ask here. My basic argument is, even in the necro-new wave seen in some corners of shukatsu, such as automated columbaria, and rental or even robotic priests to perform memorial sutras, I see a willingness and investment by many Japanese today to cling on, somehow in some way, to the ritual of making a place and space for the dead among the living. And in doing so, there is a refusal to allow for the mere abandonment of those most socially vulnerable to the trash bin of waste, as is the outcome envisioned for a future Japan for the dead, as in No Future for the Dead, by the movie Plan 75. For, as Robert Ertz once argued, and still or ought to have relevance today, giving recognition to those who once were but are no longer alive is critical to the vitality of those still living, in whatever form of collectivity that may be. Thus, in the face of such social challenges as high aging, low birth rate demographics, and solo residence patterns, trends happening elsewhere in the world today, I consider Japan as a case study of possible futures in the weaning, transforming, and redesigning of others in the management of the dead. The next section is called Changing Tides in Death Care. Having no place to go, yukibaganai, rather than a family grave already reserved is a possibility for an increasing number of the population in Japan today. But this is hardly the way it used to be. Once tending to the ancestors was a duty in a geological principle sutured to the nation state, the emperor, and the law, but also a practice of concern that embroidered caring for the dead into the everyday. Tending to the domestic shrine at home on a daily basis, and visiting the grave, ohakamairi, on key anniversaries and holidays, the living stayed in touch with the dead. And by the principle of regeneration, ancestors were attended by the care labor of kin who would one day become ancestors themselves, aspirationally at least, down the road. The ancestral grave at once materialized and symbolized this ongoing cycle of reciprocity and exchange, serving, according to Ian Reader, as receptacle for the spirits of the ancestors, site for ritual offerings to the dead, and symbol of continuity and belonging. But following the war, the Iya system was dislodged from the state, and in the 1947 Constitution, the grave went from the place to memorialize ancestors to the place for the individual's finally resting place. Since then, a number of factors have shrunk the family system further. Urbanization, decrease in marital and childbirth rates, rise of single living, and consumerism, economic decline and degrowth. And along with this, the maintenance of ancestral graves, often in the countryside, far from where most urbanites live, has become unwieldy or impossible, as family lines die out and living kin are distanced or otherwise unavailable. As a result, the number of dead who no longer have family to care for them is on the rise, as can be seen in the increase of abandoned ancestral graves in the countryside and the number of lonely dead and otherwise stranded deceased in the cities. For some, this is a sign of social and sacred neglect. The view of religious and legal scholar Mori Kenji, who considers Japan to be facing a crisis of otherness when there is the absence or refusal of others to care for caring for the dead. But at the other end, as held by feminists such as Ueno Shizuko and Inoue Haro, the coming apart of a familial system brokered on patriarchy represents an opportunity to not only make other arrangements than the patrilineal family grave, but to also rejigger the sociality on which the entire system of belonging and care has been structured. For Ueno, who has upheld the robustness of the social single, Ohistori-san, and herself is committed to remaining at home alone, where she will die, what she calls Zaitako Hitorishi rather than Kodokushi, the family system has unduly tasked women in care providing as well as excluded those outside the familial net. Better, as feminists elsewhere have also proposed, to extend care beyond the sociality and responsibility of the heteronormative family, what the CARE Collective in their CARE Manifesto have called promiscuous care. In this sense, leaving the old family system behind and having the freedom to choose somewhere something else besides the family grave signals not the dissolution of Japanese humanity, but its recrafting along more inclusive, emancipatory lines. Still, the prospect of having no place at all to wind up after death is both anxiety-provoking and fraught, as I learned from the many interlocutors I spoke to about in the course of fieldwork. As with a woman, single and middle-aged, whose family line would die out with her, she was currently tending to the family grave where her parents and ancestors were buried. But once she was gone, the grave would become messy and untended, hardly a hospitable prospect for her own future or that of her ancestors, all of whom in short time would then be dug up by the cemetery for failure to pay annual maintenance fees and reinterred in the communal grave for the disconnected. As an alternative, she is considering moving all the ancestral remains right now to an urban columbarium that she would join once deceased, a place that would provide care and eternal memorial by a Buddhist priest on staff. Or the couple in their late 70s, who, because he is a second son and can't enter his family's grave due to the rule of primogeniture, need to purchase their own grave to accommodate their 2 sons and now 4 grandchildren. But because they have fallen on hard times and lack the means for such an expenditure, they will purchase something small for just their own remains, and that of their beloved dog, whose ashes are already waiting. The next section is called Planning for the Future. It is the gap left by the eroding family mortuary system that a wave of new mortuary businesses, initiatives, and products has arisen over the last 25 years to fill. Under the rubric of endingness, the umbrella term for this is shukatsu, which combines the characters for owaru, end, with katsu for activity. Modeled on the job-seeking market, shushoku katsudo, the activity in which university and high school students seek out jobs well in advance of graduation. Shukatsu operates on the basis of anticipatory action. Taking action in the present, this anticipates by securitizing what otherwise might be a risky future. No job for youth in the one case, no grave for the dead in the other. For the ending market, consumers are enjoined to think about purchasing mortuary services for others, such as grave sites for their parents or pets. But the main target is the individual, particularly but not only those who are married, without children, or otherwise ohistori-san singles. The socially solo who are being urged here to make plans by and for themselves well in advance of death. Fed, as this is, by constant references to the possibility of winding up badly, as lonely dead, unclaimed remains, in a plot for the disconnected, with the specter this raises of being a wandering ghost, hungry and forever rootless, mumbatoke. The injunction is to seizen seidi, order one's ending affairs while still alive, shifting both the temporality and sociality of mortuary practice from an activity that was performed by others to a pre-planning conducted ahead of time, mainly by and for oneself. Shukatsu brings the future into the present, where it can be better managed as anticipatory action. The promise here is to abet the anxiety of not knowing where one is going to be buried, shifting the fuan of unease about the future with the relief, anshin, of having a plan made well in advance. In times as uncertain as the current moment, anticipation is the effective and temporal mode of living, according to Adams, Clark, and Murphy. who argue that it is handled by techniques they call abduction that do not prevent as much as anticipate crises and challenges in the future by making them a matter to be engineered into new economies of vitality. Time management drives what Nicholas Rose calls a dependence on optimization. Knowing how to organize ourselves for the inevitable disasters that are both feared and predicted leads us to construct pre-constituted futures. In the case of Shukatsu, this involves not a biopolitics of making life per se, but an activity of anticipatory death-making that can invite a form of vitality all its own, what I call necroanimism. Let me give you an example. Started as an NPO in 1996 by Inoue Haro, Ending Center is an alternative burial society located within, though not affiliated with, a Buddhist cemetery on the edge of Tokyo. Embedded in the beauty of cherry trees, it offers plots and green burial under the banner Sakura-so, cherry blossom departures, on the basis of what Inoue calls flexible relationality. Anyone can join and be buried here, irregardless of whether they have family or no one else. By paying a one-time fee, members will be interred and also invited to join Ending Center's annual memorial service for everyone already buried there or to be buried in the future. In addition, by signing up in advance, members can take advantage of the workshops, activities, and get-togethers that are hosted for the still living to assist in the myriad of arrangements that go into pre-planning a good death these days. As I learned by attending any number of these at Ending Center, but also at Shukatsu events held by public entities, private funeral parlors, consultancy firms, and coffee shops across Tokyo, the number of tasks now set for responsibly ordering one's ending plans, Seizen Seri, is endless. Deciding on inheritance, living will, whether or not or what kind of funeral and burial spot one wants, how to transport one's remains there at the end, what to do with the cleanup of one's belongings, turning off electricity, dumping data from phone, and how to manage any pets that might outlast one's own death. Though the iteration of so many tasks could leave me exhausted at the end, I was surprised at how animated, even upbeat, the mood often was in the room, as if the activity of pre-planning one's ending constituted a mission, managing death as a form of living for the post-productive in Japan. Or, as Jonathan Lear, writing in a different context, has called radical anticipation, about what helps to not only envision an uncertain future, but contributes imaginative and practical tools with which to prepare for it. In her book, The Moral Neoliberal, Andrea Muhlebark discovered something similar with aging seniors in Italy, who found doing welfare work as unpaid volunteers for the state to be a stand-in with both moral and social benefits for the jobs they no longer had. In the case of pre-death planning, the target of activity is more oneself than others, yet here too, a social moralism of self-responsibility accrues. For when failing to make these plans, one may die alone at home, leaving a mess of decomposing body and things that often get discovered by the pungency of the smell, as one workshop led by a cleanup worker announced with slide after slide of homes filled with hoarded stuff left behind by lonely dead that elicited sighs of disgust in the audience, as we were told to by this man, the head of a service company that will sort through and clean up the belongings of the deceased, Ihensei Gaisha. Sign up for this ahead of time and therefore be orderly and well prepared, as was the continual mantra across Shukatsu long before one's physical end. Doing so avoids the outcome of a messy death, with that unruly smell so much reported on the news accompanying stories of lonely death. The smell arising from and bespeaking unsociality. By contrast, at Ending Center, in the activity of doing death-making, whether at a luncheon to discuss self-care, at a workshop to design one's own funeral, or at the symposium to learn about inheritance, living members often engage one another socially and refer to one another by a sociality anticipating their future deaths as well. Hakatomo, grave friends, is the term. As several told me, they enjoyed these get-togethers, the activity itself, and the companionship it offers with one another. When one perky 80-year-old came up to introduce herself at the annual social gathering with sushi and beer, her name tag had a number on it that I asked her about. "Oh, that is the location of the plot I'm to be buried in. I want my fellow grave friends to know where I'll be." She laughed before scooting away. On another day, a married woman told me she had saved her earnings at a part-time job in order to be buried at Ending Center instead of the grave of her husband's family. When asked why, she replied, "Those ancestors, I don't know them. Being buried here is a choice I am making for myself." As Inoue whispered to me later, 10% of Ending Center members fall into the same category of married women seeking a disconnection from a final destination with in-laws they do not want. Post-death divorce, she calls us. As at Ending Center, the activity of pre-planning one's death can be pleasurable, meaningful, and fulfilling on any number of accounts. Yet, as with the mantra I heard repeatedly of jibun nashi, do it your own way, Shukatsu is also consumerist, selling the choice of making one's own ending plans to neoliberal, responsible selves. What about those lacking the financial or human capital or simple desire to take this on but are also socially all alone? Do they befall the fate of the ungrievable, in Judith Butler's terms, those whose deaths do not matter to anyone else? Is there any other response to this situation of social precarity than shukatsu, in other words? One alternative has been taken up by the city of Yokosuka, situated 40 miles south of Tokyo on Tokyo Bay. Faced with rising numbers of lonely dead, which by law become the responsibility of the municipality to manage, cremate, and inter if kin refuse to do so, the city has been besieged by the cost of what it calls unclaimed remains, constituting 3.3% of the dead nationwide. This came to 51 for the city of 400,000 population in 2017. Those who have died alone leaving remains that no kin will claim responsibility for. To counter this situation and the expense for Yokosuka, it started a new program in 2015 to give financial assistance to those most vulnerable to becoming lonely dead without the kin or financial means to have a funeral and proper burial. In 2018, it came up with another plan, essentially an identity card, Watashi no Shukatsu no Toro, whereby those most socially precarious, but actually anyone, keep a record on their person and also a copy at City Hall listing the mortuary arrangements they have made ahead of time. That way, when someone dies, they won't be treated as a disconnected soul. Rather, this identity card for the dead, as it were, accords but also anticipates grievability to what may otherwise become abandoned deceased. The motivation for Yokosuka is that these pre-existing mortuary plans allow the city to tap into national funding to defray the cost for the burials and funerals for their indigent residents. But the hinge is getting such people to anticipate and care where they will wind up themselves, and to then sign up for a plan ahead of time, seizen keiyaku, that will stamp their burial site as a form of identification to be carried on one's body while still alive. Like the woman at Ending Center with the number of her plot on the name card she wore, this is an anticipatory subjectivity when dead. And the promise is that by having a set location, and in this sense, a name, one will wind up with a more humane ending. The importance, as Thomas Lacour has written, of necronominalism. My final section, ending with the ancestors. In all the focus given to anticipatory planning for the future in Shukatsu today, what has happened to the place of the ancestral grave and that of the ancestors once housed there? To end, I briefly consider another aspect of Japan's emergent deathscape, that of high-rise and often technologized columbaria, no kotsudo, in the cities that are becoming increasingly popular to house not only the newly dead, but also the ancestors who once lay for generations, if not centuries, in family plots in the countryside. In one such facility, this one, an automated style delivery system, Jidohan Soshiki no Katsudo, called Senichidani Joen in Tokyo. It fuses a 400-year-old Soto Buddhist temple with a mortuary business, Hasegawa, and sells family plots, but also slots to non-parishioners whose remains are contained in the warehouse side of things. But designed by architect Kuma Kengo with 100-year-old cedar trees from Yamaguchi Prefects and other quality materials, the interior is at once stunning and aesthetically zen. Stepping inside, one enters a tranquil, high-end temple to the dead situated amidst the urban buzz. Located in Tokyo, close to a subway station, convenience is paramount here, as is service. Everything is kept tidy and managed by staff who also provide Eitai Kuyo, the Buddhist memorial sutras of Kuyo done by a resident Buddhist priest for all those interred here for a designated time period. As Ueno-san, the director, told me, this is a particular attraction for those being interred who lack family and kin, no one else to perform these rites for them following death. But paradoxically, or not, Senichidani is a columbarium that also sports 6 traditional graves, black granite of the highest grade, that sitting on the 2nd floor will temporarily house the remains of anyone who has a visitor coming to pay respects. Then, by the technological apparatus of an automated conveyor system designed by Daifuku, the company that built conveyor lines for Toyota's just-in-time delivery system that engined Japan's post-war automobile industry, the remains are moved in 40 seconds from the warehouse in a box marked by the deceased name. After visitation, a button is pressed, and the grave is emptied again, triggering the recirculation of the remains back to the booth in the warehouse. As Ueno-san told me, each box held in the warehouse can contain the remains of up to 10 dead, or even more, he laughed, if one cuts down on the amount of ash of older ancestors. For, as he continued, shutting down ancestral graves in the countryside, Hakajimai, and moving them to a place such as this, Kaiso, has become increasingly popular. Many of the boxes in the warehouse contain what were once entire ancestral graves in the countryside. Being here is what allows any kin who still remain to attend to them more easily and to be relieved, as many interlocutors shared, of their sense of guilt once kin had died out and there would be no one to take care of the ancestral dead. Then at least the dead would be in a place like this, receiving kuyo and a grave kept fresh with flowers and electronic incense, even if their remains stayed perpetually in the warehouse nearby. This still represents a sociality, what I have argued to be a prosthetic presence that inheres in the just-in-time movement of the technological apparatus to and from a grave that is or feels different from winding up abandoned as disconnected souls. A techno-social deathscape for the future in the term used by Michael Fish, sitting in our audience, in his own elegant study of Rurikoin, another automated style columbarium 5 minutes from Shinjuku Station. This is where I end, in a deathscape that is still in a state of becoming, inching towards the future not yet known, but anticipated to increasingly need alternative technologies for the social apparatus of grieving and visiting the dead once performed by human kin. But encased in the automation, Senichidani Joen retains the grave, keeping its form in a gesture that sits in attention, as Jose Munoz, writing about Andy Warhol's artistic series of Coke bottles, put it, between functionality and non-functionality. the promise and potentiality of the ornament. And even while visits made by visitors to these graves may only decrease over time, there is still something akin to utopia implanted here, enacted by a certain surplus in the work that promises futurity, something that is not quite here. As does Munoz with Queerness in Art, I see something playful, but also serious in the automated grave system that caters to the future dead, but also to the ancestors these days. The refusal to accept doing nothing, and the willingness to strive for something otherwise than the well-worn but no longer working. Thank you. And I have a few images. So this is what a grave used to look like. So this is a monument for the disconnected dead in a cemetery. This is another, most cemeteries have their sections for the disconnected, Muembo. This is an abandoned, nothing's there. This is a new kind of alternative form of collective grave. This is taken from City Hall in Yokosuka. This is unclaimed remains. This is this is Index, ending exhibit. There is now annual in the summer in August convention for the mortuary industry that is just kind of wild in industry, incredibly interesting. So just a couple pictures from there. For pets. Urns for pets. And this is where I saw Pepper. Pepper practicing to become, being able to deliver Buddhist sutras. And everyone was wildly crazy about Pepper. And everyone was very engaged. So this was about 3 years ago. I don't think it's been operational yet. This is still in the future. This is from Designing Your Own Funeral at Ending Center. An activity was 3.5 hours and was incredibly interesting. With many, everyone got quite energized by coming up and sharing suggestions of how you can design coffins. I think coffins for other people, but maybe also your own coffin, so, which is an interesting idea. And this is Senichidani. Joanne, this is so you go inside and you put on the screen your prayers card, and then they will tell you what grave to go to. So let's say my mother's buried there. I put in the prayers card, and they say, okay, in 40 seconds she will be at grave number 2. But this is the warehouse. This is the warehouse. This is what it looks like, where they're usually housed. I think it's upside down. I think it's off. Sorry, I think it's off. And here are the graves. So there were 6, and they're kind of in booths with a little privacy, in case you want privacy. These are the boxes that hold up to 10 or more if you want to be creative and reduce the amount of ash. And this is what it looks like. So you stand in front, you can now put, a visual of the person you're visiting, and then when you're done, you press the button and the doors close. Okay, that's it. Thank you.